What up, guys? Today I want to talk about the Saiyans' original backstory before we got like the modernized retcon version of it. This is when we got Dragon Ball Minus, and they changed Goku's backstory and a little bit of the Saiyans. Definitely Bardock's backstory was changed, and after that we had Dragon Ball Super, and then we had the Broly film, which also changed quite a bit of the Saiyan backstory and history. Uh, it if you guys before Dragon Ball Super came out or before even Battle of Gods came out, if you guys check on like the wiki page and stuff, um there's a description from some interviews from Toriyama and some backstory he gave about the Saiyans, past and the history of them going from their planet to planet Sadala, which became into planet Vegeta, and then it changed as a whole. And all that stuff with that, it was completely different at that time. And then after Dragon Ball Minus and with the new revamp and new retcons with Toriyama redoing the backstory, it completely changed. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because it's actually kind of significantly important. If you guys did the research before the changes happened, they had this story structure and explaining all the backstory on what happened with the Saiyans and their history, and it was a certain way. But once when Dragon Ball Minus came out and the more modern Dragon Ball story of the backstory, it ended up changing. And by that change happening, all these if you look on Google, wherever you go on Wikipedia or whatever, to look at the Saiyans backstory, it's going to be different now. So if you search it up back then, it would have been different than what it is now because they revamped it and they adjusted it more for the modern take of the backstory. And the original take was actually different than the modern take, but you just can't really find it. Luckily for me, I was such a big Dragon Ball fan. Even as a kid, I did the research before even Battle of Gods came out, and I still remember, quite a bit of the story because it was really intriguing. And the backstory of the Saiyans is not completely different, but it's mostly different in the original one than in the newer one. And like I said, since the newer one, they revamped it on all these forums and websites, you're not going to find the original backstory of the Saints. So that's why I'm making this video to explain to you guys. So some of you guys might be wondering about a lot of the Saints history that you guys are probably just not that certain on or understand, and you might want to search it up yourselves, but you're going to search up only the more modern takes of it. And I want to give you the original take instead of the modern one, because the modern one, I think they completely or from what I've seen from Toriyama, he completely butchered his story. So starting off with the original story, it starts off on their original home planet, which they didn't really name it in the original one, but we know in the newer one they call it planet Sadala, which obviously plays off the word salad, so it makes sense. So in the original backstory, what happened was the planet got destroyed because there was a civil war. So there was two factions. I know in Battle of Gods they mentioned the good Saiyans versus the evil Saiyans, but that was way further back with the Yomoshi and the original Super Saiyan God, and that was a completely different thing. But this one was not a fight between evil Saiyans and good Saiyans. It was just a fight between Saiyans fighting for dominancy over the planet as a whole. So we had this whole civil war. On one side, it was run by King Vegeta. At that time, he was General Vegeta. They didn't have a king; he was just the general, and he was running their army on one of the Civil War side, and then the other side they didn't mention who it was, but it just stated that it was warring factions between two separate sides of the Saiyans that wanted to control the planet. Both were evil, unlike in the Battle of Gods, where they mentioned in the past there was the good Saiyans versus the evil Saiyans, but that was also way further in the past because that was before King Vegeta's time. So what happened was they had them both fighting. King Vegeta at that time was General Vegeta, so he was the general of the Saiyan civil war of one of the sides. They ended up both getting into a big conflict, and as their conflict happened, they ended up destroying the planet. Now, in the modern version of Dragon Ball, they also mentioned this. Vegeta said it about when he was talking about Kaba and Chukaba and Goku. He mentioned that, yeah, the original Saiyans, they had a civil war and that broke out and destroyed the planet. They didn't explain to what extent did it destroy the planet. Did it just destroy the surface or blow up the entire planet? But in the original version, what Toriyama stated was that as the Civil War happened, it ended up actually blowing up the planet. So they were basically going back and forth, shooting off big energy blasts. As that happened, it ended up destroying the planet. and the planet was basically turning into like in Krypton, where it was going to be destroyed, but not instantly. It was going to take some time, so there were some time to leave. And by this happening, after they basically were destroying the planet, and it was led by General Vegeta at that time. He basically he got all of his troops and all as many Saiyans as he could off the planet onto spaceships. So they got into spaceships and left. And as they left, the planet blew up, killing the rest of the Saiyans. So majority of the Saiyans died from either the Civil War that was raging for like decades, or I for a few years or decades. I don't know how long they said it was, but it was raging for quite a while, and quite a bit of Saiyans ended up dying in the Civil War. And then once the planet got destroyed, and when most of the Saiyans got destroyed, and there was only a few of them surviving in the ships. There was like a couple millions, I think they said, that survived in the ships as they left planet Sadala to find a new planet. And they said that they were drifting off in space for a few years to find a suitable planet. So they went from having Civil War, killing a bunch of people, led by General Vegeta. Then the planet got destroyed, and General Vegeta led his troops and the rest of the Saiyans to leave on ships, thus having the planet destroyed to kill the rest of the Saiyans. Even his own people, people on his side, also died. And then when they left on the ship, it was like a few million, and they were on a bunch of ships left. I think it was less than a few million, maybe a couple hundreds of thousands, because there is a number that Toriyama gives us, but it's way later on how many Saiyans we had later in the series. And there's a little bit of a backstory with why the Saiyans have a certain number of people. So they left their population got far smaller. Now they have no planet and they're drifting in space. But the thing about the Saiyans is that they're conquerors, they're fighters, they're warriors. So they were not very advanced, but they were somehow advanced enough to create their spaceships, multiple of them, to carry a bunch of people to leave and survive in space for a few years, but whatever. But they located a planet, and that was Planet Plant, which was obviously the planet of the Safudijins, which in the English dub they call them the Tuffles. So I'm just going to call them Tuffles because it's easier to pronounce. So they found the Tuffles planet, and they went onto a planet, and they came onto the planet. Now the Tuffles, they were technologically advanced, but they were far smaller than Saiyans. They were far weaker. They were weaker than even regular humans, but they were very advanced with their technology. Now, as the Saiyans landed on there, they couldn't just come there and automatically try to conquer them and dominate them, because one, their numbers were far smaller. Two, they don't know the severity and the dangers of this planet, so they need to kind of scope it out. So as they landed, they came there to uh instead of just or like from the jump trying to attack them and kill them, they they came there to basically scout the planet and see the level of the inhabitants and the threat level and the danger level, so they can formulate a plan and a plot to basically wipe them out and take a planet for themselves. So now they arrived, and as they arrived, they had a lot of conflict between the Tuffles. There was a lot of back and forth conflict, but at that time, the conflict wasn't really like physical. It wasn't a war. It was more like a Cold War, where it was basically there was a lot of tension and there was stuff building up, and it could have led to a war, which in this case it did. So what was happening was it went from the Tuffles having this planet to themselves to now an alien species coming out of nowhere to their planet. And the Tuffles are more of a peaceful race, but obviously they're not going to trust them. They're like, who are these random aliens? They come here, they saying they're just here to, they lost their plan. They're just here to survive. They're not here to start a fight, but they seem a little rough and tough, and they don't know them. So they were like, on one hand, they allowed them and welcomed them, but on the other hand, they were really like, iffy on them, to the point where they just didn't interact. So for a few years, they didn't specify. He didn't specify how long, but it was a few years that they didn't fight. But there was tension between the two races, and the Tuffles didn't want the Saiyans on their planet. They're saying, "This is our planet. These alien race came here randomly, and they've just been hiding here." And then the Saiyans wanted to conquer them, but they also had technological advancements, so they didn't know how to go about it. So the Saiyans stayed more in like the mountain areas. They stayed in caves, and these were more primitive anyway. That's how they lived on their planet. So they stayed in the caves while the rest of the Supervisions lived in the towns. And as they lived in the towns, they were they were scared of the Saiyans doing something because they felt that they're plotting something, but they just didn't want to enact because they're more peaceful, like I said, and they're not really fighters. So they were just like, we're not gonna fight until they do something that makes us, have to react that way. So they were cautious of them, and the Saiyans were staying back, plotting and stuff. But they had a low amount of interactions. They didn't like each other, but they kind of coexisted for a bit, and then they stayed there. So at that time, since he was the last general and he was the one leading the charge, at that point, he was basically their leader, and they were looking at him as their leader. He wasn't the king yet, but he was going to be cemented as the king in the future. So at this point, he had enough time to prepare and to see how capable they were, and they had launched their attack. So as that attack happened, it ended up having a fight between both the Safudijins versus the Saiyans. I don't know what time period this happened in, but they had a fight and they had a war that was raging on for quite a bit. The war actually raged on for 10 years. So it lasted a whole decade between the Saiyans and the Safudijins. Now, some of you guys are going to be wondering, how did they, how were they able to handle the Saiyans? The Saiyans are way more powerful, right? Why weren't they able to wipe them out? The only reason the Saiyans weren't able to wipe them out was even though the Saiyans were stronger, they were technologically far more primitive, even though they were somehow able to create spaceships and locate a planet to take over or whatever. But they were primitive and they only had their power. And yes, they were more powerful, but the Safudijins had more advanced technology that could combat them. So even though they were physically stronger, they had more technological advancements. So it was brute strength versus, intelligence. And that war raged on for 10 years back and forth between those two. The Saiyans did have more of an advantage, but they were struggling and quite a bit of their people were dying off. And the fact that they were already, their population was already small at that point because they fought and killed a bunch of their own people and the planet destroyed. So their race was also far less. They had billions of people versus like a few hundreds of thousands to maybe even just a few thousands. And we do get a rough number later on towards later in the story. But at that point, it was raging on for 10 years. And what really changed the tide was the planet's moon. Now, some of you guys are going to say, wait, you mean like, the full moon? Yes, the full moon happened and they went to the ape form because in their base form, they were able to put up a fight, but they just weren't able to overpower them. But the Ozaru form, obviously they get a 10 times multiplier, but they need the full moon. Now, some of you guys are going to be wondering, well, if they need the full moon, then why did it take them 10 years to win the fight? And the only reason it took them 10 years to win the fight was because the moon cycles on, planet at that time was different than Earth's. Earth's moon cycles, when we go through, the crescent moon, the half moon, and the full moon, and the new moon, all those stuff, it takes like, weeks and months and stuff like that. But in their planet, since their planet has a higher level of gravity and it's bigger, and then they also stated they had three moons. They didn't just have one; they had three moons on planet. So they had three moons, and then the orbit was a little bit weird. So it took more time for the phases. On Earth, on our Earth, or on our planet, not on our Earth. On our planet, it doesn't take too long for it to happen. I don't know how much time it takes, but it takes like at least a few months. Whereas in the planet, it took around like 8 to 10 years. And the reason why it took 10 years is because by the time they came, it was I think 2 years past the 8 year time mark that it had, or it just happened before that or something like that. But it was some weird thing. But all you need to know is that the moon's phasing, or like one of the moons phasing on planet took around like 8 to 10 years, whereas ours takes far shorter. So that's why it took them 10 years to win the war. If the moon phase was a lot shorter, let's say like it took like 2 months for it to go through all of its cycles and to get into a full moon, they would have been able to beat them within those 2 months. But since they landed on a planet where the orbit is a little bit different and it takes around 8 to 10 years, it took them a lot longer for them to see a full moon so they can transform. But once they did, they ended up killing the rest of the, Teufels. They wiped the entire race off the planet. And as they killed them all off, they now finally had the chance to inhabit the planet. So they were there for an unspecific amount of time, maybe a year or two, inspecting and scouting the planet to see, how to conquer it and how to take over. and then it took them 10 years, roughly around 10 years, to basically wipe them out and conquer their planet and take over for themselves. So once when they ended up killing them and destroying them, now they flooded into the towns and the cities, and they also started stealing their technology. They took their tanks, they took their guns, they took all the weapons, and one of the most viable weapon that, or piece of technology they took, besides the more advanced spaceships that they had, so they could use for conquering, was the scouters, which was definitely retconned later on in the Broly film, because we did not get the scouters from them. We got the scouters from Frieza's force, which they showed, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But the guns and other stuff were cool, but they weren't very useful. They did have, like, I think they had the healing chambers. They also had the healing chambers, and they had other advanced tech and the ships, but the scouters were really important. So now with this new technology, they were more advanced. They had their own planet, but the Saiyans are not just satisfied with just having their own planet, because they're a warrior race. And you would think at this point, they're like, dude, you guys have had enough battle, haven't you? You guys lost everything. You had this ridiculous civil war for whatever reason, killed a bunch of your people off, got your own planet destroyed, got more people killed off. Then you guys drift off in space for a few years. Then you finally found a planet. Then you had an inspector for a few years. Then took you a whole 10-year decade war just to fucking end it. And now you just ended it. You took their technology, and now you're automatically thinking, we just ended a 10-year war that, wiped our people out even shorter. Let's now use this technology to conquer other planets and take over other worlds for whatever reason. So they started doing that to conquer other planets to make money, because they were basically now at this point, they were mercenaries. They were going around, conquering planets and taking over. And they weren't even taking it over to establish it further, like fully into like an empire. It was mostly just to sell it and make resources and make money off of it. So it was kind of like an enterprise, like what Frieza was doing. And that kind of also, that's how they got into crosshairs with Frieza's dad, King Cold, which I'll also go into his backstory and what happened there. But as that happened, says they won, and they won under the lead of General Vegeta, and he led the troops all the way from their planet to here and did that. They elected him king, and the way they do Saiyan rule is not through lineage usually, though we do see later on lineage, but they usually do through power. And their former king was put up there for power, and that's what they were fighting against, because General Vegeta then wanted to take over, right? So now that they took over here, and he proved himself, and he was the leader already before that in general, they said, you know what? You're going to be our king. You're not only our strongest, but you were the one who was leading the charge the entire time, so you might as well be the ruler. So he became from General Vegeta to King Vegeta. And and Nappa was also fighting with Vegeta's dad. So King Vegeta and Nappa were fighting in the Civil War. He was his right hand man. I think he was, like, they said, his captain or something like that. Whatever is below the general, he was his right hand man fighting him. And as that happened, after the Civil War and stuff, and after this whole battle, since King Vegeta got promoted into a king, Nappa actually got promoted into General Vegeta. So now, not General Vegeta, sorry, he got promoted to General Nappa. So he became General Nappa, the lead of the Elite Saiyan Command. And then they had obviously, at that point, they started establishing the hierarchy, which they already did before in Planet Sadala. So this was already in Planet Sadala, but they just reinstated it this time under, King Vegeta's rule, and the leader of the Elite Force or Task Unit, or whatever you want to call it, was pretty much General Nappa at that point, which he also later on got a different duty as a general, and a big role that we see later on is in the show. So he became the general, he became the king. They established the new hierarchy of the elite Saiyans and the low class Saiyans. There were only two classes, elite and low. In our world, there's like upper class, lower class, middle class, but that's usually through income. They did only through power, because they were a warrior race and they were all battle hardened. And this is a clear cut difference between the original backstory of the Saiyans and the more modern one, because I had some arguments with some people in some other videos about, the because I had problems with the Broly film, and how there were Saiyans that were so weak that it was like, how are these guys this weak? Shouldn't have they been shipped off to other clans? Because we already know this, right? did they get sent off to other planets if they're too weak? And it's like they would have either died or should have been stronger than that. So why are they doing this? And some people say, well, they don't do that for everyone. They just do that for some, and not everybody's class in elite and lower class. But that's only for the modern Dragon Ball. That's what was changed. In the original, that wasn't the case. In the original, it was only they were a warrior race and they were just elite and low class. Now, there's a couple of interesting things that happened as the time progressed and as he became king. They start to evolve in their in their new world, and the great thing about the Saiyans is even though they're not that very intelligent, they're very adaptable. So they were able to adapt to the technology and the scouters and stuff like that. And since they were able to use the technology that the Sufurigens left after they destroyed them, they used that to conquer other planets, sell them, make money. As they made a profit, that's how they that's how the empire made money. In our world, we do it through either gambling or um, through the movie industry or whatever, right? We make money through different ways, different countries. The way the Saiyans civilization did it was through being planet brokers and selling planets and stuff, and basically conquering them. But they also had a different job later on as King Cold came into the mix. But at this point, they were using this. This was their empire. Their empire was to conquer other ones and make money from it. They weren't really owning them, but I think they might have had some, like King Vegeta had some under his rule, but mostly he was just doing this to own and make money and profit for it, so they can advance the civilization even more and spread their, their will and their power, and also just because they enjoy it. So at that point, they did that, and then there was a few changes that happened to the society as a whole, and a few things. One, when it came to the Saiyans, the species had dwindled down severely. For I don't know what point it whittled down to this number. I forgot of because this was years ago. Like I said, it was when I was like a young kid. So even remembering at this point is kind of crazy. But from it was either after they beat the Sufurigens, or it was at the point where we get to when we see the backstory of Frieza coming in or whatever, right? At that point, the Saiyans, the population was only 2,000. So there was only 2,000 Saiyans. So there wasn't that many. Just like how the Viltrumites only had like 50, there was only a handful of Saiyans. Obviously, definitely a lot more than 50, but only 2,000. So from the conflict from the Civil War, the planet being destroyed, um, then possibly some of them dying on the ship trying to get to the planet because of starvation maybe, then the second war that they had against the Septuagints for 10 years killed off quite a bit of them, so quite a bit of their population ended up dying, and it got down from whatever it used to be to only 2,000. So they were already even before Frieza blew up Planet Vegeta, they were pretty much a race on they would be on the endangered species list. It's not like they were like, oh, they were thriving and then Frieza destroyed it and then they were like now gonna be extinct. It was they with the way they were living and the way they were acting and the shit they were putting themselves through, they were not gonna really live that long anyway. They were pretty much wiping their own race out. So they created their own extinction anyway. So if Frieza didn't do dumb shit, these dumbasses would have probably killed them all themselves off anyway. And one of the other reasons that it was explained that a lot of the number was so small and a lot of them died off was not only because of that, but also due to the fact that when they went on missions to these other planets and did these, try to conquer them and stuff like that, two things would happen. Either one, they would die in battle going to these planets because they would be a lot more tough than they thought, or two, they would fail, and if they would fail, they would just commit suicide, kind of like the Japanese samurai, which they were kind of a little bit based off of. If you see the Saiyan armor with like the shoulder pads, it's kind of like the samurai armor. But yeah, that's why they were also so small, because going on these big, uh, excursions or whatever, to go to another planet to conquer them, you ended up getting a bunch of people killed in wars. And then on the other half, even if they didn't die, if they failed, they had this strength of honor and pride that we failed, we have to kill ourselves. So majority of the Saiyans ended up dying and killing themselves. And this was also important because somebody asked Toriyama, he's like, how long do Saiyans live? And he said, I don't know, the Saiyans might live around like human ages or like around 80 or maybe longer, like 100 or 120 years, somewhere around there. We don't know because the Saiyans don't live that long. He said most Saiyans do not reach the age of 80. The reason why they do not reach the age of 80 is because most of them die prematurely, either through, conflict or killing themselves or killing each other. So they're either killing each other, getting killed by other races because they're fighting them, or killing themselves because they failed a mission. So they, even though we don't know how long they can live, they're most likely around like human times. Like how old humans can live, like around 80 to hundreds of over 100 years, right? They usually did not live that long. Most of them died around like less than 80, around like 60 years old. So for a Saiyan to be around 60 or above, it was a big accomplishment. It showed how tough they were. It showed how great they were. It showed that no matter what threat they fought against, they were able to survive. And then whatever mission they went on, they were able to complete it, because if they didn't, they would have just ended themselves. That's also why Vegeta leaving when he lost to Goku was actually very disgraceful, especially as a, Prince of Saiyans. It's very disgraceful to leave, because of that was one of the other Saiyans, and they ended up failing. They wouldn't have taken the chance. They would have just told Krillin, "Hey, kill me," instead of just like saying, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna let it go," or begging for mercy like how Raditz did. They would have just rather died. They say, "I failed. I deserve to die." So either they would have told their the person that was going to kill him to kill him, or they would have killed themselves. And the only reason that they would have killed themselves is because under the rule of King Vegeta, if they failed anyway, he would have killed them. So they might as well end their own life. So Vegeta, what he did, and also Raditz, what they both did was pretty considered, cowardice, in their race. And that's why it's also kind of a little weird, because Vegeta killed Napoli's Akira, who used to say, is saying, because he couldn't fight anymore, which means he failed, so he might as well die. But then so did he. But he was able to obviously heal himself, but he broke the rules. But at that point, the Saiyan race was wiped out, so I guess they don't have to follow those rules that closely. But yeah, most of them, they would live around our ages, but they died prematurely, and being 60 was, a big deal. And there was actually somebody specifically that we know that actually reached the age of 60, and you're gonna be like, that's kind of shocking. But yeah, they started doing that. They started conquering other planets. They only had like 2,000. A lot of them started committing suicide, doing this other things. It's also kind of like the Spartans. A lot of the Saiyans have this stuff for the Spartans, and then obviously the hierarchy between low class and upper class. If they were too low, like Goku and stuff like that, they would be sent off to planets to obviously, as a toddler, to conquer and destroy. And they said two things would happen. Either they would end up failing and end up dying to the race that they're trying to conquer, which the Saiyans don't care. Is like, if you're too weak to conquer these weaker planets, then you don't deserve to live. And if you're strong enough to survive, they would come back to the planet, because there would be a certain amount of time that you would need. They would give you like, I think for like until you're like a child to do it, and if it's past that, then you would be a failure. The only reason Goku got it way later, the Raditz came, was only because the Saiyan race was wiped out at that point. If the Saiyan race still existed and it didn't get wiped out by Frieza, King Vegeta would have sent somebody to the planet to check what it was happening. And if he didn't kill, they would have probably just left, or probably killed him, or whatever. All I know is that they were sent there to kill them, and if they did win, then they would come. They was inspected and say, "Oh, good job, you won." They will tell them, "Hey, look, you're saying we sent you off on this planet to wipe out because you were too weak, but since you did this, you proved that you are strong, so we will bring you back into the society as a whole." So they would take them and then bring them back. So King Vegeta would take them, and then they would put them into the special unit where they would train them again, and then put them into their class. Since they were weaker and they were sent on the planets, even though they proved themselves, they would still be considered low class Saiyans. So as low class Saiyans, they would pretty much be, what's the thing called? They would just be a part of the low class. They couldn't be elite. So that's why Vegeta said no matter how much you train, you can never be an elite. So they would have been a low class, but at least they would have been a part of the society as a whole. And there was other stuff and other implications to that. But I have been rambling for quite a bit. Is around like 30 minutes I've been talking. So I will just end this off as part one. I'll be doing a couple other parts, hopefully not too many, but I will be doing other parts going through the rest of the story. There shouldn't be too much, and I'm going to separate these parts out. So stay tuned for part two of this series of the origins of the Saiyans, and I'll be explaining what happens later and some other interesting tidbits that you guys might really enjoy. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for next time.